on. Yes, it is. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you all for joining us for today's meeting of the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee. I'm Jim Roosevelt from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, along with my good friend Mignon Moore from the District of Columbia. We serve as co-chairs of the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee. As we begin, please join me and stand if you are able in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome again. I will now ask our parliamentarian, Helen McFadden, to call the roll.
Good morning. Mr. Applebaum has given his proxy to Mr. Curry. Ms. Blanco? Ms. Brazil? Mr. Brennan? Mr. Burgos has given his proxy to Mr. Ray. Ms. Cardona? Mr. Curry?
Present.
Ms. Daughtry? Ms. Desai Martin?
Here.
Ms. Dowdell?
Present.
Mr. Elete?
Here.
Ms. Fowler? Mr. Iridia has given his proxy to Dennis Spate. Mr. Jones has given his proxy to Ms. Brazil. Mr. Jones, Florida. Ms. Kmark? Here. Mr. Leone? Here. Ms. Lewis? Here. Ms. McGarrick? Here. Mr. Martin? Here. Ms. Martinez has given her proxy to Ms. Blanco. Mr. McDonald? Here. Mr. McClinchy has given his proxy to Ms. McGarrick. Mr. Mitchell? Mr. Ray? Here. Ms. Ronan? Here. Mr. Saunders? He's here. Mr. Spate? Here. Ms. Schwecker? Here. Mr. Thompson has given his proxy to Mr. Elete. Ms. Weingarten? Here. Ms. Williams has given her proxy to Ms. Desai Martin. You have everyone here, Mr. Chairman, in person or in proxy.
Madam Chairman.
Oh, Madam Chairman, I'm sorry.
Oops, sorry about that. Thank you, Helen. We have a quorum. Per our charter and bylaws, a quorum is constituted by 40% or 14 RBC committee members present in person or by proxy. We'll begin this morning by welcoming our newest committee member, Carol Rowan. Carol, can you raise your hand? Hi, Carol. Welcome. Carol is a longtime DNC member from Illinois who joins us after serving on the Budget and Finance Committee. She served in both the Illinois State House and Senate for over 15 years and was inducted into the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame in 2005. Chair Harrison's appointment of Carol was ratified at the fall DNC meeting, and we're happy to have her with us today. Thank you for joining us. I also want to recognize the teams who work behind the scenes to make sure our meeting runs smoothly. In addition to thanking Helen for her continued support of this committee, Jim and I want to acknowledge Veronica Martinez-Roman and the Party Affairs team, John Mott, Erica Bukili, and Rick Boylan, who continue to work tirelessly to facilitate our delegate selection process. We also want to recognize Jenna Whitaker, who has served as the Special Assistant in the Party Affairs Office for the last 2 years. Jenna has taken on a new role in the DNC We appreciate Jenna's assistance and work with this committee and wish her luck in her new position. We'd also like to express our gratitude to DNC leadership Sam Cornell, Mary Beth Cahill, and Nick Bauer, the Secretary's office, and the DNC General Counsel, Andy Levin. Thank you to everyone who contributes to making sure our meeting runs smoothly. And I'd also like to say congratulations to Andy, because the last time we met, I think she was running off to get married. And she is now officially married, and I think she's very happy. So I will turn this back over to Jim.
So we last met, in the beginning of October, and since that time, the Office of Party Affairs has been hard at work collaborating with state parties to ensure their plans are in full compliance as we head into 2024. Today, we'll start by providing you with an update of the plans that have been moved into full compliance since our last meeting, as well as provide an update on a few plans that are still in conditional compliance. We'll then transition to discussing the delegate selection plan in New Hampshire, which is currently considered non-compliant. Following that discussion, we'll update you on the status of the challenge to the Alabama Democratic Party, and then we will be ready for adjournment. Are there any questions as we begin? Minyan, I'll turn it over to you then.
Great. The Party Affairs Department works closely with states to achieve full compliance for their plans. Once a state party has taken appropriate corrective action in response to each of the items listed in the staff's evaluations the committee has approved, the state plans is then automatically found in compliance. We're proud to share with you that 37 plans have been found in full compliance, which is 19 additional plans since our October meeting. I'll pause for a moment to let Aaron project the list of fully compliant states on the screen. The addition of the 19 states to our list of fully compliant plans is no small feat, and it keeps us on track for the process coming up next year. In addition to the 37 plans now in compliance, there are still 17 plans currently in conditional compliance and 1 plan in non-compliance. Before discussing a few of the conditionally compliant plans, which requires waivers, we'd like to review Puerto Rico's delegate selection plan, as we can hopefully move it into full compliance list, move it to the full compliant list as well.
So, as you'll recall, this committee considered Puerto Rico's plan at the July meeting and found the plan to be in conditional compliance. After completing the revisions required to bring the plan into compliance, the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico learned that Puerto Rico's Financial Oversight and Management Board had reduced the funding appropriated for its state-run presidential primary. Big surprise. The party has since submitted an amended plan that reflects the change in funding. Under Regulation 2.9, the substantive amendments included in the most recently submitted plan must be approved by the RBC. I'll recognize John to provide an overview of the Puerto Rico plan's amendments before we move to a discussion and vote.
Thank you. Puerto Rico's amended plan, as you just heard, became necessary after the Financial Oversight and Management Board reduced the budget from $1.2 million to $150,000. After discussing the options with their party executive committee and the State Elections Commission, the party decided to move forward with a scaled-back state-run primary to be held on April 28th, 2024, which is 6 weeks later than their originally scheduled primary. The primary will include no-excuse absentee voting, along with in-person early voting 8 days before the primary at 12 regional offices of the State Center for Integrated Voter Services. On Election Day, at least one polling station will be available for in-person voting in each of Puerto Rico's 8 senatorial districts. Under their plan, Puerto Rico will elect 33 district-level delegates on the ballot in a two-part primary. They'll select 7 PLEO delegates, 11 at-large delegates, and 5 at-large alternates at their state convention on June 8th, which is 1 week later than they had originally planned. In addition to updating their primary date and state convention date, they updated the corresponding deadlines throughout the plan so that they would comply with our rules. All other components of the plan remain the same. In compliance with Regulation 2.9B, Puerto Rico's Executive Committee met on November 2nd and approved the amended plan. So Puerto Rico's amended plan complies with the rules, call, and regulations, so staff recommends that the plan be found in full compliance.
Thank you, John. Do we have any questions for John? Do we have a motion? Okay, so we have a motion to find the plan in full compliance, and we have no further discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. And it is unanimous among those present and voting and with proxies.
So we'll now move on to waivers. We'll now move on to considering 2 issues that require waivers to our delegate selection rules involving the states of New York and Utah. We'll begin with New York. New York has submitted a request for a waiver to Rule 15A. Under 15A, if a state requires the filing of nominating petitions as the sole method to place a presidential candidate's name on the presidential primary ballot, the signature requirements for such petitions shall not exceed 5,000 signatures. In New York, state law requires presidential candidates to file nominating petitions containing the signatures of 15,000 voters in excess of the limit contained in Rule 15A. In its waiver request, the New York State Party stated that it continues to advocate for easier ballot access and is committed to working with all candidates to comply with this requirement. I'll now ask for a motion to approve New York's waiver request so we can begin our discussion. We have a motion and second. The floor is open for discussion by members. David?
Thank you. Somebody's got a good finger. I see from the letter that the state party is advocating, but does that in and of itself meet our standard for all provable positive steps, number one? And number two, what are the automatic delegates from New York doing? I don't have the rule right in front of me, but I have this memory that it's supposed to be the party officials and the automatic delegates and elected officials are supposed to be taking all positive provable steps to change a law that conflicts with our rules.
I can't speak directly to what their, I can't speak directly to what their automatic delegates have done about this. This is certainly something we can discuss with the New York Democratic Party and provide an answer for you. But I'll turn to Andy regarding provable positive steps.
Yes, so the standard is that the state party and other relevant Democratic Party leaders and elected officials need to take provable positive steps, not that those who will be, per se, automatic delegates need to take provable positive steps.
My basic point was that I don't think on its face the letter is necessarily sufficient. I'm happy to have this, I guess, pass and the co-chairs remind New York that people like the governor and other people need to be trying to change the law as well, not just saying that the state party chair has sent a letter and therefore we've advocated for it. That's insufficient, and if we let that low level be a standard, we're going to have problems in other states with other state legislatures.
I think that's right. And we could do that. Is there any further discussion? Oh,
There. Susan Swecker, Chair in Virginia. I can provide some historical context of how requirements for proof poverty steps, because 20 years ago, I came before this committee, and Frank Leone remembers this, to ask for a waiver of 10,000 signatures down to 5,000, because that's what the Code of Virginia required at that, from 5,000 up to 10, because the Code of Virginia required 10 at that point. And we actually went to the steps of putting in legislation and got shot down by the Republicans who were in control at that point. So even that proactive step was not enough to allow us to have the waiver. We came up with an artful actually, Don Fowler came up with a very artful way that we were able to get around it, where the state party would be responsible for the additional 5,000 signatures, but it wouldn't be on the candidates. So just a little walk down memory lane on that. So I would agree with David that in some concern about why New York would get a waiver for this one 20 years ago. I couldn't.
is there any further discussion? Carol?
Thank you. I'm curious, is this new this year, or have we given them this exact waiver 25 times in the past? So this is an old issue in New York that has not been resolved.
Madam Chair, I might suggest that we take a vote instructing staff to work with the New York party to demonstrate that the sort of steps, the provable positive steps that Susan has suggested be taken, including by Democratic elected officials in New York, and that the staff determined those steps have been taken before moving New York to full compliance. Would someone like to move an amendment?
So we're doing
motion with that amendment.
Go ahead, Jim.
So it's moved and seconded. And Elaine?
Yeah. When does the window open for collecting these signatures? Do we know? Because if we're delaying, that could be costly to the candidates. Do we know this, Veronica? When's the first day you can start collecting signatures in New York?
My understanding is that they're already collecting signatures currently based on something I heard last night, but let me double check their plan right now.
All right. That's my only concern.
I know it has begun in Massachusetts, for example.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the chair will ask for a vote on the motion to approve New York's waiver request with the amendment that Jim has offered. All in favor? Those opposed? The ayes have it. Moving on to Utah, the party has submitted a request for a waiver of Rules 2A and 2B. A copy of the party's request is in your package. As you know, Rule 2A requires participation in a state's delegate selection process to be open to all voters who wish to participate as Democrats, and defines Democrats as those persons who publicly declare their party preference and have that preference publicly recorded. Rule 2B states that nothing in these rules shall be interpreted to encourage or permit states with party registration and enrollment, or states that limit participation to Democrats only, to amend their systems to open participation to members of other parties. Until 2020, Utah was a caucus state, and participation in their state caucuses was limited to Democrats. In 2020, the state changed to a presidential primary system, but the question of who voted in our party's presidential primary was not clearly indicated. Under Utah law, presidential primaries are open to all voters unless the political party chooses to close their primary. Utah state law allows parties to restrict participation in the presidential primary to allow only those voters meeting the registered party's political criteria to vote for the party's presidential candidates. This section of the code also gives the party the option to allow non-affiliated voters to vote in the Democratic Party with their choice of the Democratic ballot recorded in conformity to Rule 2A1. In order to restrict participation in the presidential primary, the state party was required to inform the lieutenant governor of such a decision by 5 p.m. on August 10, 2023. The state party failed to do so before the deadline, so staff asked the party to submit a waiver request. Because the deadline to close the primary and comply with the rules, with Rules 2A and 2B has passed, the co-chairs support allowing the waiver, but only for the 2024 presidential primary. Approval of this waiver should be with the understanding that, 1, this does not create a precedent, and 2, the state party must take the necessary steps in future cycles to close the primary and ensure compliance with Rules 2A and 2B. So do I have a motion? The floor is open for discussion by the members. David.
Now that I've learned how to turn on the microphone. I don't have a particular problem with this. Essentially, it's the same thing as same-day registration, which we advocate for. The only technical difference is that the voters' registration with the government is not being changed to the Democratic Party, which is a change I think they should advocate for if they decide they want to use the result that they've ended up with here. But conceptually, they're simply by accident getting to a point that we have advocated for in the past, and I would go ahead and give them the waiver on a one-time basis, saying that they shouldn't be doing this by accident and they should take some steps to protect themselves from actual Republicans who have no interest in changing, but simply want to play around with our result.
Is there any further discussion? Frank?
Is this a mail-in vote primary only?
Rick has been dealing with Utah. Would you like to answer that, please?
Great question. I know that a portion of this is vote by mail primary, but I have to double check to make sure that whether it's all vote by mail. So,
And I guess the other question is if there is an in-person component, are those voters identified as voting in the Democratic primary?
they are identified as voting, as taking a Democratic ballot, and Utah has a vote by mail component, but they also allow people to register as late as Election Day to change their party registration as late as Election Day, same day registration, and people can vote on Election Day as well.
Okay, well, yeah, I agree with David. This makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Any further discussion? Jim? Okay, I'm sorry. Seeing no further discussion, the chair will ask for a vote on the motion to allow Utah's waiver request for the 2020 presidential primary only. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. So we're now moving on to our favorite topic, ranked choice voting. So, we also wanted people to be provided an update on the states that were approved to include ranked choice voting in their plans. We discussed the main plan at our July, September, and October meetings. In October, the committee granted Maine a waiver to proceed with its ranked choice voting tabulation process as designed by the state, but limited the waiver to the 2024 cycle. We communicated to party officials that they must commit to working on this issue for 2028, and that if it's not resolved, the committee may require the main Democratic Party to explore implementing other processes. The state party has acknowledged the waiver's conditions. We look forward to working with them when we move into the 2028 cycle. We reviewed the plans of Alaska, Hawaii, and Wyoming at our July meeting and found each plan to be in conditional compliance. At our October meeting, we provided additional guidance related to the compliance with the 15% viability threshold in Rule 14. Since we last met, the DNC Party Affairs and Voter Protection staff have met with these state parties and shared the committee's determination on how the ranked choice voting process must fit within the application of our delegate selection rules. All 3 states have submitted revised plans that take our guidance into consideration. After reviewing the revised plans for Alaska and Hawaii, staff recommended that both states' plans be moved into full compliance. Wyoming continues to work with staff to revise its delegate selection plan, but has incorporated the committee's guidance on the use of ranked choice voting into its plan. That brings us to Oregon. We considered Oregon's plan at our June meeting and requested a more detailed explanation of the ranked choice voting process for the selecting delegates. The DNC Party Affairs and Voter Protections Department worked with the staff from the Democratic Party of Oregon to produce a more robust explanation of their process, which is now incorporated into Oregon's delegate selection plan. You can find a copy of the multi-winner ranked choice voting process explanation in your folders. Taking into consideration the staff recommendation and supplemental information provided by the state party, I'll ask for a motion to find the plan in full compliance so we can begin any discussion on Oregon. We have a motion and second, and the floor is open for discussion by our members. Frank?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that in Oregon, what we're talking about here is using ranked choice voting for the election of the actual delegates. It's not being used to allocate the presidential primary vote, if my understanding is correct.
Okay. David?
I'm not opposed to the use of the ranked choice voting in this process. I am a little concerned in this system where it looks like the voters are not required to vote for a gender balanced ballot. They can vote for less than the number of delegates that are voted, and they have a threshold that you are required to meet before you're elected. And it's too complex to work out in my head, having just seen this morning, but it leaves me with some concern that at some point, too many ballots voting for all the same gender or excluding a gender lead to a result where there ends up being what amounts to a vacancy in another gender that gets filled and the whole thing gets out of balance. if staff could kind of further clarify with them how they prevent that. I think it's automatically prevented if they're required to vote a gender balanced ballot, which is the requirement that we have in my state. But I have over the years learned in this committee that not every state requires that on ballots. So I'm concerned about it. So.
Andy or Aaron, do you want to address that? Okay.
Hi, we actually have discussed this with the state, and there's two options here. They can do exactly what you're proposing, David, which is the two gender votes. They also have described a process where they can do a single ballot, and then we actually have a single ballot explainer for non-binary delegate inclusion. So we've had extensive conversations with this, and we're confident that they'll be able to gender balance their delegates.
Yeah, no, I think as long as the voter is required to vote for an equally divided slate, as opposed to deciding I only like males, so there may be 10 people running, but I'm going to vote for 10 males or something, that begins to skew the process. But if their solution is to require equal division on the ballot, if you're using a common ballot, that's fine. So.
Great. I think they've got it covered.
Is there any further discussion on ranked choice voting?
Okay, seeing no further discussion, the chair will ask for a vote on the motion to find Oregon plan in full compliance. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. And the ayes have it. And I'll move to Jim.
So another plan that has progressed since our October meeting is Iowa's. We considered Iowa's delegate selection plan at our October meeting and found it to be in conditional compliance because the state party added a time frame for its party-run process that is in line with our rules. Within the plan itself, there were still significant logistical questions left unanswered, and we asked the Iowa Democratic Party to work to resolve those issues expeditiously. We will now update you on the status of Iowa's plan more fully in a moment, but before we do, we want to ensure an understanding of Iowa's process. Iowa is implementing a party-run process to determine presidential preference. They'll do so by hosting a mail-in process from January 12 until March 5 for voters to submit their presidential preference. On March 5, which is Super Tuesday, they will announce the results of their party-run preference process and will use those results to allocate delegates who will be selected at county and state conventions later in the cycle. To contextualize why Iowa chose to and is able to conduct this process, it's important to understand the nominating process as a function of their party organization rather than as a general election, which is a responsibility of the government writ large. Of course, they are not totally exclusive of one another. Our primaries benefit from a state's ensuring fair and equal access for voters. But at the end of the day, we are a membership organization selecting its leader, not a branch of the government conducting a general election. The primary season is a part of a process within the organization of the Democratic Party. That's not just our point of view, that's a perspective shared by the United States Supreme Court in the Democratic Party of the United States versus Wisconsin, ex rel. La Follette, which held that a state cannot constitutionally compel a political party to select its national convention delegates in a manner that violates party rules. Important principle there. At the end of the day, it's our duty to Democrats nationwide to create an even playing field with rules determined in advance, and it's our responsibility to all those who play by those rules to ensure they're followed. While this committee historically encourages state parties to move towards state-run processes, party-run processes are an important tool for ensuring the implementation of our rules as determined by our organization. So while we know that states that conduct party-run contests tend to highlight the personal engagement and retail value that they see, party-run processes also benefit the party by allowing us flexibility to conduct our party business in a way that reflects our values. Mignon, would you tell us a little bit more about Iowa's delegate selection plan?
Sure. In terms of Iowa's plan itself, we had expected a logistical update in mid-October based on dates shared in Iowa's plan, but did not receive it. On October 31, we sent a letter to the Iowa Democratic Party requesting an update on key logistical pieces by November 13th and a full plan update by November 22nd. A copy of this letter can be found in your folder, as well as the document we received in response on November 16th. We do not have a comprehensive updated plan from Iowa, but we know it's in progress. While we still have concerns about the logistics plan to date, we continue to support the IDP and look forward to hearing updates from Scott today. Scott, do you have any update or on upcoming deadlines that you'd like to share?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you, Scott, for getting us this far.
Sorry? Oh, true.
Tomorrow.
So tomorrow, we have a state central committee meeting, so I get to get home late tonight and then do that tomorrow. But the SCC meeting, the state central committee will ratify Chair Hart's determination that our presidential preference card will have the president, Congressman Phillips, Marianne Williamson, and uncommitted on our presidential preference card. But we'll have ratification tomorrow.
Thank you, Scott. Members, please let us know if you have any questions for Scott. Seeing no questions, I'll turn it back to Jim.
So having heard about Iowa, we're now going to talk about New Hampshire. I know many of you have been closely following developments in New Hampshire. While there has been movement since our last meeting, none of the updates we will share today are particularly unexpected. We'll discuss recent news items, review the resubmitted delegate selection plan, and talk about what steps the rules indicate are next, and we'll provide discussion after each recap. First, we want to make sure we're all on the same page on recent news and on state-imposed dates and deadlines. You are likely aware that the state of New Hampshire conducted a ballot access filing period from October 11 to 27. They requested letters of intent and a filing fee from all candidates to appear on the ballot on a then unspecified primary day. Campaigns were left to determine whether to meet the deadline, knowing that the date set by the Secretary of State might possibly infringe upon party rules. Several campaigns contacted us for guidance, and on October 24, we provided them with the letter you find in your packet. We'll also cast it on the screen and give a few moments for the folks online to read it. In discussion with the Office of Party Affairs, we advised campaigns of two key rules that you are familiar with. We flagged Rules 21C1B, the penalties for presidential candidates who campaign in non-compliant states, and 14G, the rule that defines a beauty contest to them. Rule 21C1B1 says that a candidate who campaigns in a state where a primary is set by a state's government on a date that violates the timing provisions will not receive pledged delegates or delegate votes from that state, and that campaigning includes placing a candidate's name on the ballot or failing to take action to remove it from the ballot. Because New Hampshire's contest was not announced, but would very likely violate our timing provision, we also highlighted Rule 14G to explain what would happen if the announced date was January 23, as had been reported at that time. 14G states that the non-binding advisory presidential preference portion of primaries, which we commonly call beauty contests or straw polls, are not considered a step in the delegate selection process and are considered detrimental, and state parties and presidential candidates should not participate. We clarified that, should the state of New Hampshire select a date other than those prescribed by the RBC, then candidates should not place their name on the ballot or should take action to remove it from the ballot. We asked that if their campaign had already filed, they inform the RBC of its process to remove their name from the ballot. We were also clear that if they place the candidate's name on the ballot or fail to take action to remove it from the ballot, they will not receive pledged delegates or delegate votes from New Hampshire. So that's what candidates were told during filing, and ultimately 21 Democrats filed to appear on the January 23 state primary ballot. You may not have heard of all 21, but they all filed. On November 15, after filing closed, Secretary of State Scanlon announced the state primary for January 23, as had been forecasted since earlier in the year. We'll discuss the application of rules and next steps after we review the New Hampshire Democratic Party's resubmitted plan. But are there any questions at this point? Mignon, I'll turn it back to you to take a look at the resubmitted plan.
Sure, but before we move on to the plan, I'd just like to acknowledge that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor passed this morning, and we'd like to give a moment of silence for her and her outstanding leadership on the Supreme Court. Thank you. After the Secretary's announcement, the New Hampshire Democratic Party was able to resubmit a delegate selection plan with dates added and much of the staff evaluation address, which Veronica will now share with us, and it's available in your folders.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. As you can see from the staff evaluation, a lot of the smaller issues were taken care of in the New Hampshire plan. There still remain a few points that we need to discuss with New Hampshire. But of course, the largest change, most significant change, is the addition of the date of January 23rd as their first determining step. And so as you'll see throughout the staff evaluation and in the summary of findings, we flagged that that is not an acceptable first determining step as defined by 14G and is in conflict with 12A as well as 14G and incurs a number of rules that you all will discuss after this because of that inclusion specifically. And so we plan to continue working with the New Hampshire Democratic Party, but as it stands, we have no recommendation to move this plan from anything but noncompliance. So my understanding is the plan will remain in noncompliance unless you all take any other action.
Thank you, Veronica. Given the staff evaluation and the copy of the New Hampshire delegate selection plan submitted on November 22nd, we see that the state party has listed a contest on January 23rd, not February 6th or March 5th or later, and is therefore in violation of Rule 12. That leads to the application of several rules that Jim and I will walk through in a moment. After we do, we'd love to take a pause and get your feedback on all this information we've given to you today. Jim?
So, for the basis of our conversation, we need to look again at 14G, as well as rules 21C1A and 21C4. An aside, but David and others would also probably note the rules 21C1B and 21C5, which discuss further sanctions and sanctions upon presidential candidates campaigning in a violating state are relevant here. But for now, let's focus on rules that automatically come into play and how we can facilitate a solution with New Hampshire. First, let's talk about the January 23rd event itself. As we just covered, 14G states that when a contest is a straw poll, it will not be considered a step in the delegate selection process. State parties must take steps to educate the public that the contest is meaningless, and state parties and presidential candidates should not participate. Minion and I have thought through the application of what this looks like with New Hampshire. To avoid promoting and participating in an unsanctioned contest, which is essentially what this rule compels state parties and candidates to do, the press should also be aware that no delegates will be awarded in New Hampshire based on the January 23 results. And that's something that I think has not come across clearly in the media so far, and that needs to be emphasized not just by us, but by the New Hampshire State Party. Additionally, the state party should avoid basing any of its dates on processes related to the January 23 event. Finally, candidates who have applied for ballot access for the January 23 poll should demonstrate their attempts to remove their candidate from the ballot. That essentially describes our perspective on the January 23 event. In a moment, we'll talk about sanctions and solutions for the state party, but first we want to pause and see if there are any questions on our judgment of the January 23 event. All right. I'd now like to discuss a few rules that come to mind after hearing the staff evaluation of New Hampshire's plan. The next rules we should think about before discussing possible solutions for the New Hampshire Democratic Party are rules 21C1A and 21C4, which you will see on the screen. In a minute. 21C1A and 21C4. There we go. 21C1A, there we are, tells us that when a delegate selection plan provides for a primary which constitutes a first determining stage in violation of Rule 12, the pledged delegation will be reduced by 50%, and none of the automatic delegates will be permitted to vote as members of the state's delegation. That means that New Hampshire will have 11 pledged delegates and 1 pledged alternate. 21C4 states that once we find a state in violation, as we are discussing today, the reduction we just described will be effective automatically and immediately without any further action. So I'll confer with Helen, but we won't be voting on implementing the reduction of delegates. It occurs when we officially determine the plan is in violation of Rule 12's timing provision, as we are discussing today.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. It's kind of conferring that I like. I also want to clarify something. It might seem illogical that we say delegates won't be allocated by the January 23rd contest and then follow with a discussion saying New Hampshire has half its pledged delegates. That's because we still need to discuss how New Hampshire will select delegates, if not based on January 23rd's results. But first we want to check in on the items we've discussed thus far. So we'll come back to that point and try to resolve the perplexed look on Frank's face. Does anyone have questions or thoughts about Rule 21C1A and its automatic application?
So I think I'm in agreement with you, but I just want to make sure that I am. The effect of us deciding that their plan is not in compliance is going to be effectively the call to the convention is amended, and the delegates that they are allocated have been cut in half, because the way the rule reads is that the delegates allocated to New Hampshire are cut in half and their automatic delegates lose their vote. That is not a retrievable situation. They have no valid plan for electing the delegates they will be allocated, but whatever plan they submit is then going to have to be based on having 11, whatever the number is of elected
11
delegates.
plus one alternate.
And if we approve that plan, then they'll be allowed to do the half. But that rule relates to what is allocated to the state, not to what happens after they've elected them. So if we take the next vote that we could easily take at this point, that their plan, the deadline has passed to submit a plan that's in compliance, and any later plan we might consider, but the deadline has passed, this penalty has come into play. That's it in terms of the ceiling on their delegates has been capped. Do we agree on that?
I agree with that.
Yeah, okay.
Frank?
Yeah, I guess the problem I have is the conflict that the chair noted. The Rule 21C1A applies when the first determining stage is held prior to the process, and we're saying that the beauty contest is not a determining stage. So I'm just not sure how that applies now. And I'm not sure that it would be irretrievable and uncorrectable if New Hampshire later does submit a delegate selection plan which complies with our rules. Maybe we can clarify that.
So, Mignon, were you, or?
I think looking at the rule, you'll see, of course, in the beginning, it states that if a plan provides or permits for this, or if the event itself is held in violation of it. The plan we received from New Hampshire on November 22nd explicitly provided for January 23rd to be the first determining step. That does not mean it's the case. We said in the staff evaluation that it is not a non-binding preference event and that it can't be their first determining stage, but the plan we received did provide or permit for that, and so that was the reading.
All right. Any further questions or thoughts about Rule 21C1A? Okay, so we sort of know where we stand there. I'm going to differ with just one thing with the word irretrievable. I don't know what it would be, but there could be an occurrence where something occurs in New Hampshire, presumably not by the state government, but by the state party, that brings them into compliance, even though the call to the convention has already specified a smaller delegate allocation. It seems to me it's possible there could be some mechanism at that point that would retrieve the situation.
So I don't disagree, and I think maybe what I should say is irretrievable by anything other than a vote of the full DNC or the convention, because we don't have the authority to go back and amend our rules. It's an automatic penalty. We can't change the call. So.
That is correct. It is not by us or even just by the state party, but by the full DNC or the convention. I just didn't want us to leave a record that indicates there's nothing that could be done by anybody ever. Okay. Any further questions or discussion? Yes.
Jim, but that's saying that they do not hold a contest based on the plan that was already submitted, because both of those are two denials under 14 and 21 right now that we're considering because that date was already listed. So that would mean that they would have to submit a plan that's post that date, and another body would have to address that situation.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? All right, Mignana, we'll turn it back to you to discuss the New Hampshire party run process.
Okay, so as we were,
Mo? Would someone show Mo how to turn the microphone on?
Yeah,
There
okay,
we go.
sorry. But referring to C1B, it does state, if I'm reading this right, that any candidate who campaigns in a state that's found in violation shall not receive pledged delegates or delegate votes from that state. So just to walk through the whole thing, no delegates are allocated on January 23rd at all. When delegates are allocated later, it will be at 50%. And any candidate who chose to leave their name on the ballot on that unsanctioned January 23rd date will not receive any of those delegates that are allocated later on, just to be clear.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
So this is the automatically and immediately provision. We don't have to take action. David?
So before we move on, I want to make sure I understand the current state of play. The plan is in noncompliance, and we have found it in noncompliance?
We did at our last meeting.
Right, and we have been allowing by waiver or vote or consent New Hampshire to submit an amended plan. Do we need to take a vote today to say there are no further extensions? Anything else is a submission of a plan, but the penalty has taken effect.
So they submitted an amended plan. We didn't have to allow it. They just submitted it. We have looked at it, and it does not substantively change the situation, and therefore there's nothing for us to take action on.
Well, but that's what I'm getting to. What is the triggering event for the automatic reduction to take place? If it hasn't already taken place, then we must need to do something that causes it to take place. And if we're not doing it today, then when is it thought that we're going to do it?
So it takes place, in my opinion, by the finding in noncompliance and then the occurrence of an event that purports to be a first determining step, but we do not consider it that.
can we also get
Right. Sorry.
Can we get an opinion from Helen right quick on this, if we might, to David's question?
Excuse me.
If Andy would listen to this and also concur, you took a vote for non-compliance, and you instructed the staff to go back and work with New Hampshire. So the staff has indicated to New Hampshire that the first determining step issue is the primary reason for the non-compliance. There are a couple others, but the primary. So those communications are partially in writing, partially oral. Today, you don't need to change that vote because it still exists. It's out there. The question for today was, has anything else come to you that changes the determination from, that was not the October meeting, it was an earlier than October meeting, okay? And the staff report is No, nothing has come that would change the earlier opinion.
So my concern is, as Veronica noted, the rule says that if you submit a plan that permits a violation of timing rule, that this penalty comes into play automatically. And their plan permits it. Whether it ever occurs is a different question. And so if our position is we don't need to take a vote today because they previously submitted a plan, that would also mean that they have already had their delegates reduced. And nothing that we can do will change whether or not they get more delegates. Only the National Committee or the convention can change it based on Jim and I's last colloquy, as opposed to a situation where we say there is a time limit by which you have to submit a timely plan, and if at the end of that time limit your timely plan still permits a invalid primary, then that's when the penalty is triggered and it comes into play, because we don't penalize people, we don't penalize state parties for submitting an invalid plan in the first instance. We've always given everybody a chance to correct, but I worry in this situation, we want to be clear that there comes a time where you may be able to try to correct it to get something back, but you're no longer able to get the full thing, because we have to figure out when this penalty takes place, and under its wording, it takes place as soon as you submit a plan that calls for an out-of-calendar primary.
So I would just point out that there have been dates that we've extended several times. So that has passed. Now, in terms of, is there a way to recover from that if there was an attempt to do that? That's going to, it seems to me that when the call to the convention is issued with the allocation, that's when there is something that has been done by the DNC that would have to be changed by the full DNC, not us, to change that situation.
But the full committee has adopted the call in the allocation. That has taken place. There's not an issuance of a call that has not,
So you're
that's
right.
happened.
You're right. So both of those prerequisites have occurred.
So what I'm getting to is I think we either need to take a vote today to say the penalty has been triggered because your plan has yet to be amended. We've given you several opportunities. Or we need to say we'll give you one last opportunity of X days, but if the plan is still the same as it is, the penalty is triggered, and after that, if you request it, we might allow you to submit a new plan, but it's going to be under the penalty.
I am dubious that we actually need to take an action to do that, but I'll turn to.
And Veronica also wants to ask.
Okay, Dennis has something to say, and then Veronica, and then I'm going to circle back to you, Helen.
Just real quick, to follow up with what David said, I guess what's the harm in saying explicitly that their plan conflicts rules 12 and 14, and allow that to be the automatic trigger?
So you're saying, what is the harm in this committee taking a collective judgment that the plan does conflict with these rules? I get the question. I'm not answering it yet, but I get the question.
I just wanted to add a bit from the process standpoint, because we are treading a bit into like process of review and what happens when the staff evaluation. I'm glad you mentioned Rule 12 and 14, because those are both mentioned explicitly in the staff evaluation as well as the summary of findings. As Helen and Jim explained, I don't think a revote on noncompliance is necessary because it's already in noncompliance. The staff evaluation is based on their resubmitted plan. And so process-wise, when a plan is found in noncompliance, a state has 30 days to resubmit it to our offices for review, which New Hampshire met. It doesn't talk about additional follow-up there, but that is assumed because, as we all know, working through these processes, well, you all know better than I do, but working through these processes, it's oftentimes iterative. It's not just one draft sent back to us and then sent back to the state. The rules state that in reviewing submitted plans in noncompliance, so plans plural, the RBC may grant waivers, impose sanctions, or take the type of corrective action contemplated in Rule 21C. So I would argue that the November 22nd plan is a submitted plan. It does not change their, of course, or affect their status of noncompliance, but perhaps there's a situation where you all would want to vote to approve the staff evaluation or summary of findings because you've received them, and I hope you agree with them.
That's my point.
Yeah, but from my point of view, it still doesn't tell me, at what point does the clock run out for trying to get your full delegation? At what point does the automatic penalty come into play? Because it says it's automatic, and we're dancing carefully around making it not automatic and saying we can just do it whenever we feel like it. And at some point, not so much this time, frankly, but for 2028, when we may have some other states trying to push up front in the calendar and breaking rules, I think I would prefer to have this whole thing be very crisp and not be having an argument in the middle of an open seat convention, because no matter what happens in 2024, we will not have an incumbent president.
David, Mignon and I, I'm sorry, Jim. Mignon and I were just talking process-wise too, because we would certainly prefer a crisp system as well, but very few things in the in politics end up being so crisp. And historically, plans have been in progress until February or March in cycles. I don't have the dates in front of me, but we reviewed them last meeting. That we could take a look at the number of states that go on until the spring. We're still working with Guam and Alabama as well. We do not have those set deadlines. The RBC by November 15th has to take action on all plans that they've received, so that's our deadline there. But moving into the spring, I think you all will likely be meeting maybe potentially a few more times. And so I think that that's something you all will be discussing down the road, but I don't think at this point there's a deadline defined by the rules or one that could be set based on the current situation.
So to clarify, from my point of view, if we could accept the staff's recommendation that clearly says there's a conflict to 12A and 14G, and in concert with 21C4 behind that, I think gets you what I think David wants and what I think I want too.
So our last vote provided for a 30-day cure period. Acknowledging that occurred and there was no cure could be, I think, an appropriate action by this committee. Helen, I'm going to turn back to you now to sort of say, where are we?
Where you are right now is you have no pending motion, okay? No pending motion. Nobody has made a motion, okay? And so there's not been a motion, there's not been a second, okay? You are having some serious discussion. The discussion reveals that there are differences of opinion with regard to when said penalty would be imposed and whether it can be corrected at all. I don't think y'all need to finish that discussion at all. I mean, there are two people who have clearly articulated the opinion that it can be corrected, and at least two people who have clearly articulated the opinion that it cannot be corrected. Okay. You might, if you are looking for a date at which it cannot be corrected, that date is likely the last date in the rules for the submission of your list of delegates to the Secretary's office. At that point in time, it literally is uncorrectable except by the convention. In past years, that's been a date in June. It was June the 27th. I don't know what it is for 2024, but it's some date in June of 2024. But again, y'all are in uncharted waters for the second or third time in my lifetime with you. And you've got a difference of opinion here that is not clearly and succinctly going to one place or the other.
But if I understand the factual situation we're in, a plan was submitted, we found it in noncompliance, there's a 30-day period to correct it. The 30-day period has passed, or will pass. And so absent further action by us, an automatic penalty has been imposed. So if no motion is made, a penalty is imposed. And whether we can ever undo that penalty short of the convention or the DNC may be an argument for another day, but effectively the state of facts that have been recited is that a plan, uncorrected, permits the use of a beauty contest to allocate delegates, and therefore the automatic penalty should have been triggered at this point. Now, maybe we take some action today to say we'll give them some additional days, but I think in the absence of a motion, the record that Helen laid out would suggest that the penalty has fallen. I mean, it's in place at this point.
Does anyone disagree with that? Molly, did you have?
I was going to, Molly McGarrick, Delaware. I think what's getting lost in this is an important point. The state party has always had the option to do something outside of the government process. And I think what the Rules and Bylaws Committee has consistently said, if the New Hampshire party were to submit something that is compliant and didn't just defer to the Secretary of State says this, the state law says this, there's been a willingness to allot delegates. So if the New Hampshire party exercises their authority to hold some other contest that complies, the staff will review the plan, they'll look at the plan, they'll say whether it fits within the rules, and so there's an option to allot delegates. But as it stands now, everything we've seen, this is where we're going to end up. I mean, this is where we're going to end up because every plan that's been submitted, but I do think it's important that the committee has said, we want to be clear, the New Hampshire Democratic Party has an opportunity to do something different and a requirement to do something different if their Secretary of State and their law conflicts with our rules. So if they choose to continue to say, we hear you, we're not going to do that, we're just going to defer to our law, then this is where we're going to end up. So I don't know that a motion to clarify or anything, because there's still processes, there's rules. It feels like a motion just for the sake of a motion doesn't really clarify anything, is my personal opinion.
So I am gathering that what you've just said, Molly, clarified what Joanne was going to speak about. So unless somebody wants to offer a motion, I think we could move on to a discussion of what a party-run process would look like that Mignon is going to present. Yes.
I just had a clarifying question, and maybe I should know this, but what the hell is a beauty contest?
Okay.
I mean, I know what a beauty contest is, and I don't understand what a beauty contest is in this sense of the word, I guess.
So I don't remember whether beauty contest is defined in our rules or not. The term is there, but it's not defined.
Yeah.
So we turn to the general public understanding of what that means in politics, and what it means is an event that is essentially a straw poll. It's an event where some people choose to vote, and we see how they vote, and we don't determine how it works.
Can I jump in, Jim?
Yes,
Yeah.
Elaine.
For most of the 20th century, okay, between the start of presidential primaries in the 1920s all the way up till 1972, there were states that held presidential primaries, and almost none of those primaries had anything to do with the preferences of delegates who went to the convention.
With the actual selection of delegates for the convention.
The selection or the preferences. Okay, nothing. So, for instance, a lot of those, and that's where the term beauty contest came from. It was a kind of advisory only. And a lot of times what would happen is you'd have a presidential primary, and then on the same ballot, on the exact same ballot, Illinois was famous for this, you'd have a list of delegates, right? and the delegates would all run as uncommitted, or they'd run committed to a favorite son. Somebody might win the presidential primary and win no delegates. Okay, win absolutely no delegates. So that was actually fairly, ironically, that was fairly common. Okay, that the beauty contest was kind of there just as a kind of, okay, the candidates came in. Candidates chose to contest beauty contests if they needed it for their politics. So the most recent example was Jack Kennedy, who needed to contest Wisconsin to try and prove that he could win Protestant votes. He won Wisconsin, but he won it with all Catholic votes. So everybody said, oh, no, that doesn't count. And so he went on to West Virginia, which didn't have enough Catholics to carry the day. And he won Protestant votes and therefore was helped get him on the way to the nomination.
Indeed, where my uncle, Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr., campaigned for him to show that an Episcopalian was for him.
Right. So anyway, there is a long history of beauty contests, and what they really were the places where the candidates kind of popped in according to their political needs. But they really had, with a few exceptions, Oregon being one of them, they had no relationship to who the delegates were or who the delegates were for. So it's a long and storied history of these kind of contests.
Okay. So just to distill that from my understanding, and I think it's where you're coming from too, a beauty contest is a straw poll, and it does not determine delegates. It does not determine anything other than on a given day a group of people chose a particular candidate. It doesn't go beyond that. Okay.
Jim, if I could add one other thing, the reason it's considered detrimental is because it confuses voters into thinking they have taken a meaningful step by going to the polls and voting in the primary, and then they miss their opportunity to participate in the real process. So that's why we just not only don't like them, we also affirmatively discourage the candidates and the parties from supporting them, because they're going to deprive people of votes. And we do not want to deprive votes.
Right. Yes, Artie.
Artie Blanco. So I want to make sure that I'm clear on a couple of things. One, I want to talk about if they do not submit later on down the line, as someone has mentioned, if they do not submit anything, as of right now, they will have, it's automatic 50, half the delegates, 50%. Those delegates and anyone else has no vote at the convention, and there's no allocation for any candidates because there's no vote, right? They have no vote.
I wouldn't call them delegates. Those individuals
Sorry, those
selected.
individuals, sorry, individuals selected, my apologies. If they do submit for compliance and it's a different body potentially that would handle the approval of that, if they do submit something in 3 months or in 2 months, there will be not this body, but another potential body that would approve or review or whatever that process would be. We'll find out what that is. That's my one question. What is that other body question that came up earlier? But even if we do in some way, they submit something, they picked another date that is within compliance, they still only, my question was, do they still only are able to then allocate 50% of their, what we estimated that they would get? They would still be at 50%, but the difference was they can vote and they can allocate, and they would actually be delegates, not just individuals.
So I think what you're highlighting is that there would be a two-step process. If they were to submit something that complied with the rules as they exist now, or as they might be amended by the convention, two-step process. The first process would be a vote to accept their process. Second one would be to permit allocation of the full number of delegates originally proposed to them. Now, where that would go, I don't think we have fully explored yet, but I believe it would go either. In the situation we're in right now, it would probably have to go to a vote of the full DNC, probably by an electronic or mail ballot. There's a date that I don't remember off the top of my head when jurisdiction for everything with regard to the convention gets turned over to the convention subcommittees. And once we pass that date, I think it would go there. June 24th, according to our parliamentarian.
I think Carol has a question.
So Carol, and then Frank, and then David.
I want to back up a little bit with a question that actually has to do with penalties. Your memo to the candidates, to the presidential candidates, says we advise you to inform us of your process to remove your name from the ballot, and if you place the candidate's name on the ballot or fail to take action to remove it from the ballot, they shall not receive pledged delegates or delegate votes. I understand that rule, but if suppose a candidate says, okay, New Hampshire, take my name off your ballot, and New Hampshire's Secretary of State or whoever is printing this ballot says, it's too late. You asked too late. We're leaving your name on the ballot. If is trying and failing to remove your, do they get any help from us if they try and fail? I don't remember that being in the rule that they can, that they have the option of trying to remove their name from the ballot. It's just is your name on the ballot or is your name not on the ballot?
I'm not looking at the rule right now, but my understanding is that they must take steps. Oh, do I have that? No, it's that they must take steps. Could we have B up on the screen? Take steps to remove their name from the ballot. And because of that, I think it would be up to y'all's determination whether that's considered a step, a sufficient step, or what that looks like.
And I remember we discussed that exact point when we were talking about this. And if I recall, our consensus was, as long as you're trying, as long as you're trying to get your name off the ballot and you're not doing anything else to campaign.
We normally leave leeway for us to determine whether a step is provable, positive, and, although we don't use the word, sufficient. So we determine that.
So, but the candidate would have to take provable positive steps to remove his or her name from the ballot, but would also have to not go in there and campaign.
So, yeah, so for example, turning up on the day before the primary and saying, you know what, I want my name off the ballot. We wouldn't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Frank, did you have?
Yeah, I have a question, and maybe Dr. Kumar can address it, although I have read your book, and it's probably in there, and I'd recommend it to everybody. In 2008, my recollection is the full voting delegate strength of Michigan and Florida was restored. Is that correct? And do you recall who did that? Was it the full convention or the DNC?
I believe it was the Rules Committee at the convention. Yeah, it was the Convention Rules Committee.
That's correct.
Not this Rules Committee.
That
the
is my
Convention
recollection
Rules
as well.
Yeah.
So we had passed the date when the Rules Committee of the convention takes charge.
And that's what Helen mentioned. That's that June 24th date when we're basically out of business.
Right.
And it's the Rules Committee of the convention. Until then, the convention adjourns, and there's another DNC Rules Committee.
The other thing that's significant, though, is that the rule we're talking about now was adopted after 2008. In response to 2008.
This particular rule, yes.
Yeah, the automatic reduction penalty is new in that sense.
Yes, so, it's important as we look to past precedent to remember that the rules have changed at almost every juncture, that even in 1968, for example, when President Johnson withdrew and Hubert Humphrey, the vice president, became the nominee, there actually were no delegates that had been selected at that point because there had been no actual primaries, just beauty contests.
No, little correction.
Sorry.
There were delegates elected in 1967 by state parties. And that's why we have a rule that everything has to be in the year of the convention.
Right.
Okay, so they'd really got to jump on the thing. But of course, there were no binding rules either,
That's
so it
really
didn't
what
matter.
I'm saying. There
Yeah,
were no rules to
binding
follow
rules,
then.
yeah.
State parties had gone out and some had made a statement. Right. Yeah. David?
So the reason I put my hand up before was just when Artie was speaking, I think we need to remember that the automatic penalty doesn't just reduce the number of elected delegates. It takes away voting rights from the automatics. And once that penalty is triggered, only the convention or the DNC can give back those voting rights to the automatic delegates from the state.
Right. Yes.
Jim, regardless of the submission, and because this thing's been an ongoing piece, and that the staff has also been working with New Hampshire, at this point, we never acknowledged to them that they had lost anything. Correct? So how would we impose any part of that sanction of any part of the rules if we've not acknowledged that having taken place? Right now, we've still allowed a continuous window, and that's this piece. I'd still say there's consequences to actions, and this action of inaction has allowed this to continue to go forward. So how would we now at this point, regardless of submission or regardless of by vote, we've not acknowledged to them at any point that they've lost any part of their entitled delegates?
So I think what you're saying is we haven't sent them a letter saying this has befallen you.
Right. We've not cut off the date and dropped.
We have notified, as Joanne knows, we've notified the state party of a finding of noncompliance.
Correct.
If you look at the rules, a finding of noncompliance has the consequences we're talking about. We could, and I think you're suggesting, go back and be more explicit and say, after a full discussion at the Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting on December 1st, you should be aware that this is where things stand with regard to your delegation.
Right, because going forward, any other submissions, there's still in belief that any other submissions is going to allow for the full entitlement to take place on those submissions.
No.
Until there's an acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think we waive those penalties by not making them clear, but I think there's a lot to be said for making them clear. And
well, we need to clear up the ambiguity.
We should do that.
For that point.
We should do that.
So nobody challenges it based on that.
Right.
That's right.
I agree. Yes, David.
I would say that we need to clarify the ambiguity for the public and for the press. We may be sending the party a letter, but, everybody else may be proceeding on the assumption that this is still in play.
So I think that what a statement, or by way of a letter to the party, could do is both clarify exactly where they stand, which we have just been talking about here, but also make it clear what the result of that is, that they are not selecting delegates, that it doesn't matter what they do on January 23. And that's, as you say, as much for the benefit of the public by way of the media as for the benefit of the party and the candidates.
I guess I think that it ought to also be clarified for the public that their 30 days has run out and the automatic penalty has taken place. From my point of view, the factual record that was laid out, unless we take some action today, their delegates are cut in half under the call now.
I agree with that, and I think we ought to also make clear that this is due to actions taken by the state party. This is not something where we changed the rules because we thought it would be a good idea. And I think that leads to the next discussion about what a party-run process would look like. And that's where I'd like to go now, unless anyone has further questions. Mignon.
Okay, so fear of having you all have to say some of the things that you've already said again. As we were discussing, the New Hampshire Democratic Party still has half of its delegation to select and seat based on presidential preference. We want to focus on how we can support the party making that happen in New Hampshire in line with our rules. I think we can look to Iowa to see a very good recent example of a state designing a solution in line with the DNC rules. But I'd like to open it up to the floor to members for a brief discussion around this. Or maybe not.
Well, Scott, maybe you'd like to just give us a brief recap of how Iowa has resolved its situation.
Sure. Scott Brennan, Iowa. We went to an all mail-in process, and that people have already started registering. They started registering, I believe, on November 1 to receive a presidential preference card. Those will be mailed out between January 12 and late February. And then those will be processed, and the results will be announced on Super Tuesday, March 5th. So hopefully it's a fairly simple process.
If I may. So there we have a demonstration of a resolution of a difficult situation that works. It's
Mo?
not like it can't happen.
Yep.
I got a couple questions, if I may. How do you guys manage the cost? Did you find it to be cost prohibitive?
I don't have to know. I mean, I'm not part of the nuts and bolts.
Presumably, the fact that you guys presented that plan means that you figured out a way to make it work financially.
Our chair has been very busy fundraising.
Has anybody discussed the idea of running a state party-run process with the New Hampshire State Party?
Has anyone raised that?
Has that conversation been had with the New Hampshire Democratic Party?
We are prepared to have additional discussions after this meeting.
We can do that on a more formal basis. I will say that I know there have been not what I'd consider official conversations.
Yeah.
There have been suggestions to the New Hampshire party leadership that they do a state-run process. They've not been very extensive discussions because there was no desire to have more extensive discussions.
Yeah, I guess on their part. Yeah, I mean, look, I guess I want to take a step back, if I may, and just say something, because it really, really bums me out that we're here where we're at right now, right? As someone who has spent a lot of time in New Hampshire, as many of us have, New Hampshire has played such an important role in its historic second in the nation position, which is where it's been for half a century. And they asked us to honor their tradition. We started this whole process because we wanted to elevate new voices. And we said New Hampshire remaining in its second in the nation position fit in nicely with what we were trying to do while elevating other voices. And New Hampshire has the ability to make that happen, to take yes for an answer and make it happen, just as Iowa did, just as Missouri did, as we saw in our St. Louis meeting. New Hampshire's not the only state that has to deal with a state law passed by a state government run by the opposition party. Other states have had to deal with that, and they figured it out. Why? Because the state does not dictate how we select our nominee. We do. And so New Hampshire asked us to do something to honor their tradition. We said we would keep them in their historic second in the nation status, ask them to share it with our friends in Nevada, because we wanted to change things to reflect today's Democratic Party. New Hampshire's got a role to play. Please take yes for an answer and work with the DNC and the RBC and the chairs to find a way to make that state-run process work.
Thank you.
Important points, actually, to influence our communication.
Is there any further discussion from? Oh, hi, Joanne, please.
Joanne Dowdell, New Hampshire. Just a few points of clarification. As Mo has said, you know, New Hampshire does play a very important role. I've lived in New Hampshire and not just visited during campaign season. And we do take this process very seriously. Yes, I understand that the state party could consider and did consider a party-run process and determined in this cycle it was going to be cost prohibitive. So I want the record to be clear because it makes it sound as if New Hampshire has done nothing to move forward to be in compliance, and that is not true. In addition to that, we do have an ongoing effort that's not part of the state party, because it can't be, where there is a write-in campaign underway so that New Hampshire can post that Joe Biden will be the nominee and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will win their reelection in 2024. That is what New Hampshire Democrats want, and anything other than that is just a horrible thought. But I do want to be clear that those discussions have been had. And what we don't want to do in this cycle, which is so critical, is to test a new process and fail. We've seen that happen, and we do not want to do that. So we are very clear on what the rules are. And this body made a determination that New Hampshire was out of compliance. I know that a lot of work was done on the delegate selection plan, as Veronica has noted, to make corrections in other areas. The Secretary of State held off determining the date of the primary, and once that date was established, it further moved us out of compliance. That's where we are. But I do not want anyone to think that these discussions have not been had, that things have not been discussed or considered, because that's simply not true. Thank you.
First of all, I just want to say, Joanne, you are a fierce advocate for the granite state. The New Hampshire Democratic Party is lucky to have you as their advocate on this committee. And I'm proud to call you a friend. If there have not been formal conversations, I don't think we should declare anything cost prohibitive yet. I think we need to have that conversation, the formal communication between this body and the New Hampshire Democratic Party to see what it could look like, what can be worked out. I have a hard time believing that given all of the remarkable success that the New Hampshire Democratic Party has had over the years, it is such a tremendous state party. I know every state party is stretched thin, but other states have figured out models and mechanisms for running a state party-run process, let's at least have the conversation before we deem anything so that we can continue. I hear what you're talking about with this unsanctioned outside effort. What bothers me is it's still meaningless. In fact, the word is in the rule. The word meaningless is in the rule. And it will be seen as just that. So let's have the open conversation, the formal conversation, to see what can be worked out so that we can be sure that New Hampshire maintains its important spot in this process in a meaningful way.
Go ahead and respond then, Yvette.
So I hear you, and the word meaningless may be, in fact, in the verbiage. But to New Hampshire Democrats, it is anything but meaningless.
But I will add that Mo made a very important point about the fact that it was declared cost prohibitive, and we have not had any formal discussions with the DNC and or the staff. I think we need to leave that open for discussion. Yvette?
Yvette Lewis, Maryland. The other part of the discussion, before we even get to that, is the will there. We can say whatever we want to say about having discussions. Discussions would be meaningless if the will isn't there. And I think that that's something that needs to be clarified first. Is there willingness to even have this discussion? Because if there's no willingness to even have the discussion, this is Groundhog Day, quite frankly. For me, I don't know if everybody else feels this way, but that's the way it feels to me. So I just think that, we need to get to a finishing point with this and say, this is either it or it's not. But we're going around and around in circles.
Mm-hmm. Any further? Oh, Randy, is that Randy?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I want to just say thank you to Mo and to Joanne, because I actually heard something in the last few minutes about and maybe I just haven't gotten enough sleep, or maybe I'm wearing rose-colored glasses today, but I just want to remark that this committee, we all know what we have gone through and what all these steps have been for the last year or so. I think I just want to observe that there's lots of efforts on this committee to really make sure that we get people's vote and voice heard. And that every time we go around and around on this, like Mo just did, it is really to make sure that we get people's vote and voice heard. And do so in a way that is forward-facing and embracing of all of the voices within the Democratic Party. And I just make this last plea that if it really is, like Yvette, and I'll say it in a different way than Yvette did, if there's a way that the issue is cost as opposed to will, I suspect that there will be a lot of work done by Democrats outside of New Hampshire to help deal on the issues of cost instead of will. And I, put myself amongst them. Thank you.
And I might just suggest, I don't know how much sleep you've had and you're not wearing glasses, but you do have experience in moving past an impasse in negotiations.
Right, exactly. So true. Any further discussion? Tom?
No, not by any name.
Okay. Just want to make sure Tom didn't have anything to say. So I really do want to thank you all for your participation. As we've said from the outset of this committee's decision, including New Hampshire in the early window has always been this committee's intent after the waivers were issued, and we wanted to provide every opportunity for New Hampshire to participate. And I just want to repeat that. I think we have, and we will, and wanted to provide every opportunity for New Hampshire to participate. With that in mind, Jim and I will touch base with the New Hampshire Democratic Party to ensure all of your thoughts and recommendations are shared, and will keep you apprised of the communication. And we really do thank you for the very robust conversation and some good recommendations coming out this committee. So we'll now move on to another good topic, Alabama. So we're close to adjourning, but before we go, Jim and I have some forward motion in Alabama to share with you. In October, we approved a resolution asking the state party to send a revised set of bylaws and their membership lists to us by November 28, 2023, ahead of a vote on the revised bylaws by February 1, 2024. We're happy to share that the revised bylaws and membership lists are in your folders. Since receiving the documents, we have also received challenges that should they have concerns with proposed language or membership lists, they should provide all information to the Office of Party Affairs and the state party at this time. In the meantime, the staff will continue to work with the party and the challengers to see the October resolution through. Additionally, because of the challenge, we wanted to ensure that the delegate selection plan was voted on by all members and requested that the party conduct another vote by November 30th. We received word from the state party last night that they conducted a vote, and the SDEC approved the delegate selection plan. We look forward to reviewing the vote's results and considering Alabama's plan in the near future. Does anyone have any questions about Alabama? I think, Donna, you wanted to make a statement about Rosa Parks.
Thank you, Mignon. Earlier this morning, you told me not to preach, and so I told you I would be quiet.
Well, we heard the sermons last night, and we slept on them, and they were well received. They were well received. As you heard from the robust conversation.
Randy, I was at my finest last night. You really missed it. You missed it. You missed it. And,
it was pre-Leah's arrival, by the way.
Well, that's why I did. And if I'm not preaching today, you're not preaching today. Right. Because that's why I did it. But a Catholic must always get the last word. So I was just doing my very best as we approach this remarkable season. Just wanted, again, as I mentioned, we have been sitting with this Alabama situation now for, more than 2 years?
Yeah, forever.
For 4 years. Wow. Yvette, you have a better memory. I just believe that the last 2 years we have really been consistent in our approach. I think from day one we've alerted the leadership in Alabama to do what's right and to do it in a way that would make that state and the people from that region proud. And on this day, as many of you know, in 1955, Rosa Parks, a seamstress, sat down, and because of her courage and her tenacity, many of us are able to not just sit around this table, but we're able to stand up for equal rights and equal justice under the law. So I just wanted us to remember Ms. Parks and what she did and why we are here, because I believe that's so important. And finally, 1 year ago, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I've gotten one date wrong today, we met here in Washington, D.C. to chart a new course. And while I was silent listening to the conversation about New Hampshire, like Mo, I have winter clothes because of the years I spent in Iowa and New Hampshire. I mean, good quality winter clothes, boots,
coats, socks, and I won't even tell you about my undergarments. But more importantly, the friendships, the dedication of the people in that granite state, and of course the Hawkeye state, to democracy and getting people involved. I've always appreciated the work that you all have done in helping us to choose our president. I am now equally, after the year we've had, I'm equally anticipating that we're going to have another wonderful political season that will start on February 3rd in Carroll's and, of course, our chairman, Jamie Harrison, their beloved home state, the Palmetto State. So thank you, committee, for once again standing up, representing, but more importantly, being a force for change, because that, in my judgment, is what we were called to do as well. Thank you. I'll yield back all of my time. Since George Santos said he has nothing else to say since he's gone.
Because he was removed this morning.
He was expelled from an institution that I love. Thank you. Leah?
Good morning, everybody. I want to, I think we would be remiss from closing this meeting without acknowledging that despite all the naysayers and prognosticators, we had a very good election cycle this year with, of course, with Susie Swecker and her miracle in Virginia, but also Randy and the school board races up and down the ballot across the country. And I just think everybody said we couldn't win, we wouldn't win, and we won. And so we owe ourselves a pat on the back and some applause for the efforts that happened across our party this cycle. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mignon. That does bring us to the end of our agenda for today's meeting. We covered a lot of ground, but there are still some outstanding delegate selection plans and issues that we couldn't take up today. And while we don't have a date confirmed yet, you should expect to hear about a January virtual meeting as soon as we can confirm a date. Before we go, are there any questions? I want to thank all of you. I want to thank you, first of all, for this overwhelming turnout for this meeting, but also for the very full and respectful participation. This is what the democracy that nobody ever sees should look like. So thank you again to the members of this committee, to our staff, as has been mentioned earlier, to our parliamentarian who, as you have seen, we rely on all the time, Helen McFadden. To our legal counsel and to the Secretary's office at the DNC for everything that everybody does to make this work. Again, thank you all and have great holidays, and we'll be back to haunt you. Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Adjourned. Thanks. All right.